Beer, helping white guys dance since 1842. This is one of the many funny and crazy sayings about beer. As you can tell from the opening line of my topic, my speech is going to be about beer. Hello, my name is Michael. Today I'm going to talk to you about my hobby, homebrewing. There is much more to beer than just your basic Budweiser, Miller Lite, and Coors Light. Today I'll tell you about homebrewing, which is a hobby I started a few years ago as a Christmas present my wife gave me. First, you will need to know about some of the equipment needed in this exciting hobby, as well as the techniques used in homebrewing, and finally the two ways of storing this delicious homemade nectar. First, let us talk about the equipment needed to make beer at home. There is a myriad of equipment that can be used and bought that is not always needed, especially for a beginner. I will first go over a few of the equipment needed for a beginner, the basics that you would need to get started brewing right away. Let me go ahead and show you. I have everything laid out here behind me, so let me grab all my equipment and I'll go over each piece for you. First, you're going to need a 4 to 5 gallon stainless steel pot. Stainless steel because it does not impart flavors into your beer when you cook it on the stove. Next, you're going to need a 5 gallon carboy. They can be glass or plastic. I prefer glass, they're a little heavier. A carboy, this is a carboy. This is what you put your beer in after you brew it to ferment and to settle. It has a stopper on the top, which I will show you. You put this into a stopper. This is an airlock. You fill it with a liquid, usually water, or to keep out any bad bacteria from getting into your beer while it's fermenting, and just like that. You also will need a food grade bucket, preferably 7 gallons, the bigger the better. There are buckets made just for brewing. This one, as you can see, has a spigot on the front. This is one of the ones I use when I bottle my beer. There's a lid with another airlock, so you do not have any nasties or bacteria trying to get into your beer while it's sitting in here fermenting and then clearing. This is perfect for that. You need some hose, several feet of clear plastic hose. This is a food grade with a proper diameter. This is a cane that you can use to attach your hose. You stick it into your beer and you help siphon it to transfer it from container to container. Also, we should not forget sanitizer. This right here is a real good sanitizer. Sanitation is very important when you brew beer. If you don't clean your equipment and sanitize it, you can always have the possibility of brewing a stink batch, or a stinky batch rather. So sanitation is very important. Next, another good tool for any home brewer is a hydrometer. This will measure the specific gravity of your beer, and it lets you know when fermentation has stopped, as well as gives you a good idea of your alcohol percent or content of your beer. You take readings when you brew it, or as when it's sitting in the pot after it's cooled off and you pitched your yeast, which is another important ingredient. Then you take another reading at the end to see if fermentation has stopped. It should be near 1.01 specific gravity. That's about a point of done when it's fermenting. Then you will transfer it to another container where it can settle out and clear. Those are the pretty much basic equipment that you need for brewing beer. Next, we will talk about some of the techniques used in brewing. There is more than one way to brew beer. Actually, there's 3 ways a home brewer can brew beer. I'm going to go over the 2 ways because they're the easiest to get started, and I haven't done the 3rd one yet because it's a more involved process, requires much more equipment. First method is the extract method, which they take malted barley, which is one of the grains required for beer. They boil it up and they extract the syrup out of it, pretty much all the sugars out of the barley. It's a very simple process to use, the extract method. You have your syrup, which you boil in a pot of distilled water, depending on the recipe. It could be 3 gallons of water to the whole thing of syrup. But these are kits you buy online or at your local brew house store. Also, hops, which are their little green, sometimes bitter flavored flour. They are used in your beer when you're brewing. You can throw them in there in a grain bag, which I have a bag real quick to show you. Basically, this is a little cheesecloth right here that you tie up, fill up with your hops or any other specialty grains that you need. You tie it up and you throw it in your beer while it's cooking. It depends on the beer you're making. It goes by recipes, and other than that, yeast. This is a very important process because if you don't have yeast, it can't convert the sugars to alcohol. That's what yeast does. That's why you get alcohol in beer and other drinks such as wine. Yeast is stirred in with your beer after it's cooled down to around 70 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. You pitch your yeast in there, and within 24 to 48 hours, your container will start bubbling over. You can smell it. It's a very yeasty smell if you understand or smell yeast, kind of like bread. And the process for fermentation takes about 7 days to 10 days, depending on the strength of the beer. Another process of brewing beer is a partial grain or partial mash, as they call it. This is where you still use a little bit of extract, that syrup from the previous step, but you also use a lot more grains, and it's a lot more involved. You can tailor the recipe to your likings. This is for more of an intermediate brewer, which I've dabbled in partial mash, but I'm still kind of with extract because it's a lot easier and less time consuming. The same equipment that I showed you can be used for this procedure as well. You mash the grains, which is pretty much just steeping them like tea, into your steel pot. You mash it, you boil it, you let it set, you squeeze out all the water out of the grains, and you pitch all your yeast like you're doing an extract. There's also the third method, which is all grains, which requires a lot more equipment, and you can get into the thousands of dollars when you're talking about an all grain setup. It's as much as you want to spend on that. But there is one book that every brewer should have, and it's this right here, The Complete Joy of Homebrewing. This is pretty much like the home brewer's Bible, and they have in here everything I've talked about as far as your extract methods, your all grains and partial mashes. There's all kinds of recipes and techniques. It's a very good book for anybody, even a beginner to intermediate and advanced. Now that you have learned about the techniques used to brew beer, let's talk about a couple of the different storage methods. After your beer has been fermented and it's ready to be bottled, or it's ready to be put into another container for storage and safekeeping, well, there's two main ways. First, you can bottle it, which is pretty much how all I would say how all brewers start off. That's how I started off, bottling. This is the cheapest way, and it requires little equipment, but it is a more time-consuming process. All that you need are beer bottles, not the twist top. You want the ones that pop off because you get a better seal. Plus, to recap, it is very simple. You need that. You need bottles. You need to sanitize your bottles. You need bottle caps and a bottle capper. I'll show you right here. I have. This is a bottle capper. It's a basic model, which they can get more elaborate than this, but this does the job. There's a magnet right here that holds your bottle cap. You put it on top of the beer bottle, press down, release. That's it. There's a few home brews right here, capped. Simple as that. It doesn't take much. This is a more time-consuming method because when you're brewing beer, you brew them in 5-gallon batches. So 5 gallons is a lot of bottles to fill up. But it's cheap. You can save your bottles and reuse them. The other method is kegging your beer. This is the initial investment in kegging is a lot more, a couple $100, if not more, depending on your setup and how many taps and kegs you want. But it is a lot easier, and a lot easier to serve and store your beer. All you do, excuse me, is sanitize your corny kegs. You know, those are like they're 5 gallons and they're like soda kegs. I don't know if you've seen those. That's what a corny keg is. Those are the kind of kegs homebrewers use because they're so readily available and they're easy to open up, sanitize, and clean. You need this CO2 regulator to regulate your CO2 flow that pushes your beer and keeps it from going stale in the keg. And a 5-pound bottle of that is pretty much all you need. I don't have any of this equipment. I used to use it, but I haven't made beer in a little while, so I don't have the kegging equipment anymore. Also, you would need several feet of the clear plastic hose I showed you before and taps. And that's pretty much all you need for kegging your beer. Now, you can also use a freezer or an old refrigerator and transfer it or turn it into a kegerator or keezer, as they're called, for freezing, which there are all kinds of informations and websites about that. So now that you've seen my equipment that I've used for bottling, let me just recap what we talked about. You know, this is a great hobby. Making your own beer at home is a rewarding hobby, and it is very delicious if you brew it right. There are just a few things that you're required, you know, to make your beer. You know, your stainless steel pot, your carboy, your food grade buckets, sanitizers. You know, that's about it. That's all you really need. Also, there are several ways to brew beer, such as your extract, which is the easiest, as well as the all grain method, or the partial mash method, which is a much better setup and easier as far as being intermediate. And finally, here's the storage of your beer, you know, from the bottling to the kegging. There's so much more I could talk about on this subject, which would take well over my time, as already gone on long enough. Hopefully you all have a little understanding about this wonderful hobby of mine and have enough information to help you get started in this wonderful hobby if you're inclined. Simple web search will bring up a multitude of websites dedicated to this wonderful subject. Hope you enjoyed my speech and have a great day. Thank you.